Hello, this is Mrs. White, and I'll be talking about evidence of evolution. Now, Darwin's theory of natural selection is much more than a hypothesis. It is strongly supported by explanation that describes how living organisms change over time or evolve. And it is one of the most useful theories in science because it answers the questions and explains many observations about the natural world. And it's always backed up with evidence. So we're going to take a look at what are those different evidence of evolution. And there are 5 pieces of evidence that supports Darwin's theory of natural selection. First are fossils. Second is ancient organism remains, anatomical similarities, genetic similarities, and embryology similarities. We'll take a look at fossils first, and we learned about fossil remains as those organisms that was once living. And older fossils looks very different from the ones that is very recent. And scientists study fossils mainly because they notice that there is a gradual change over time of these ancient ones compared to the most recent fossils. And they also notice that fossils from before are said to be simple, and as it becomes a little bit more recent, it becomes more complex. And this proves that organisms did not remain the same over the course of time on Earth, and that organisms have changed and become more complex. Now, ancient organism remains are fossils of very, very old organisms, and these organisms existed millions of years ago. And these fossils of some ancient organisms suggest that there might be some similarities that existed many, many years ago. And while fossils provide this evidence that organisms may have changed over time, over the years, they also provide the evidence that living things have similarities, suggesting that all living things come from a related common ancestor. So if you can take a look at this diagram over here, or this image right here, this is a fossil of an ancient animal known as the Cyclomedusa. And this is actually resembling the modern jellyfish that we know today. Now, we also know that we can see some similarities using the anatomical structure or body plans of many organisms. And the similarities suggest that organisms have evolved or descended from a common ancestor. And the differences suggest that organisms evolved to be adapted to specific environment. Not only that, all living things have DNA. And scientists compare the DNA of different species. And the more similar the DNA is, the more closely related species are. Now, scientists have discovered that the DNA of very different looking organisms is more similar than a person may initially think, just like our lesson 1 in Evidence of Evolution in Mosamak. Now, most common sequences of DNA and gene actually exist between organisms as different as humans and the fruit fly, for example. Now, this suggests that all organisms and living things have evolved from a common ancestor. Now, another piece of evidence is your embryology. And embryology is a study of embryo. An embryo is an unborn organism at its earliest phase of development. Now, embryo of a very different looking organism surprisingly look similar, and in fact, it can be hard to tell for these embryos if you put them side by side as they are developing. And the basic plan for animals' development is practically the same for all animals. And this suggests that all animals are actually related and they share a common ancestor. Just like this one here, you can see the fish embryo, the reptile, the bird, and human embryo. If you notice, as they are developing, they have similarities. And which is why comparative embryology, which is a branch of embryology, compares and contrasts the embryos of different organisms. And scientists most often compare these embryos because they want to try and determine evolutionary relationship between animals. And scientists try to determine how animals that look very different from each other might somehow be related to each other. And comparative anatomy tells us that organisms that pretty much have very different features from each other go through the similar development phase, like the embryo stage, and suggest that they have a common ancestor. And this just proved how diverse species are, but at the same time, pretty much related. For example, all animals in their embryo stage have eyes, tails, and gill slits, just like what you see over here. The tail, the eyes, and the gill slits, the slits on the sides. And they also have that similar body structure. Not exactly alike, but the body structure is similar. Although animals are very different, there is something common in their development that suggests that we share common ancestor. And although animals have these structures, they do not necessarily have them as an adult. For example, birds and reptiles actually lose these gill slits, and humans lose the gill slits too, as well as the tail. And the loss of these structures during the embryonic development is a piece of evolutionary evidence. Now, as you can see here, the bird embryos have gill slits as they are in their embryo stage, but a full-grown bird does not have the gill slits anymore. Just to summarize what we learned about the evidence of evolution, we looked at fossils as evidence of evolution, as well as the DNA. Also, we looked at the similarities of their anatomical structure, body plans, and also comparing the embryological development of organisms. I hope this helps in understanding the evidence of evolution, and I will see you in class. Bye!